Okay, so what we're going to do for the second half of the class meeting today is do just a basic introduction to drama as a genre of literature. And we talked about already how in our composition classes at Jeff State, literature is sort of the basis for the essay writing that we do. In 101, you read a lot of short stories, so things like Faulkner's Rose for Emily or John Updike's A&P. But in this class, we're going to read a couple of short plays, we're going to read a Shakespeare play, and then at the end of the semester, we're going to do poetry. So before I kind of send you out into the world to read some scripts for plays, I want to make sure you've got the tools you need to evaluate what it is that you're looking at. So the word drama to begin with, it doesn't mean, Real Housewives of Atlanta kind of drama. This isn't, people taking each other's husbands. Drama comes from a Greek word that means to do or to perform. So when we talk about drama, what we really mean is kind of action in front of an audience. That's what's happening. So how many of you guys have been to a live play before? Yeah, maybe a while ago. Yeah, when I was in elementary school, they took us to see Peter and the Wolf at the BJCC. So that was my first live production. So poetry is probably the oldest genre of literature. Poetry is really appealing because of the repeated sounds, because of the concreteness of the images. So poetry has been around for a long, long time in human civilization. Drama is not quite that old, but it's pretty old. Dramatic productions were first staged by the ancient Greeks. There were playwrights like Sophocles and Aeschylus who really kind of gave us the foundation for Western drama. So that even if you go down to the BJCC today or you go to the Virginia Sanford Theater, a lot of the just kind of techniques and the default for performing drama comes out of that ancient Greek tradition. So it's a pretty old form of literature. There are some similarities between drama and short stories, and in a lot of ways, plays and short stories are really close to each other because they focus a lot on character. If you had me for 101, we talked in those classes mostly about character, about what was wrong with Miss Emily in A Rose for Emily, or why Sammy was so interested in the girls in bathing suits in A&P. So character is very, very central to short stories. It's also very central to plays and to drama. So a lot of the conversations we'll be having about plays in this class will talk about who are these people, what are they like, what makes them tick, what do they want, how do they behave when they can't have what it is that they want. So that's one thing that drama and short stories have in common is an emphasis on character. They also have in common an emphasis on conflict or plot. When we talk about conflict, this is actually a word on your vocabulary sheet, conflict we might describe as the obstacle to be overcome or the problem to be solved in a narrative. So the conflict is the thing that has to get worked out, right? So in A Rose for Emily, Emily doesn't really want anything to change, so she doesn't, paint her house, she doesn't keep up with the times. She doesn't want to be alone, and that's one reason she doesn't let go of her father's body. That's one reason she kind of kills her lover and keeps him in her bed for decades. Gross. But the conflict in that story is Emily's desire not to be alone, right? It's the problem that has to be solved. It's the obstacle to be overcome. So we'll talk a lot about character in drama. We'll also talk a lot about conflict because drama, maybe even more than short stories, runs on conflict. You got to get it out in the first couple of paragraphs. You got to know what's at stake for the characters who are in a drama. And so it can be very conflict driven. Drama and short stories are also similar because setting can be really important for both. Let me put character back up here. We talked about conflict. Setting is often very important. Setting in short stories, sometimes we get these really long passages of description. Keep talking about A Rose for Emily, but you might remember in that story there's a really big paragraph at the beginning that describes Emily's house. How it had once been beautiful, the neighborhood had once been nice, but everything had changed and she hadn't kept up with the times, and her house was kind of an eyesore among eyesores, Faulkner says. So setting is very important to that story because her house is important, the town is important, they're very gossipy, there are a lot of rumors about Miss Emily. setting is also important in drama, but it's handled a little bit different way. In drama, everything is kind of on the stage in front of you, and so you don't really, when you attend a play, get a handout that's a long passage description, right? That would be ridiculous. If you go to a play and you get, a page of here's what the house looks like, and then the stage is blank, right? They actually put what the house is supposed to look like on the stage. So whenever you're reading kind of the descriptions of how the stage is supposed to be set, these are what are called stage directions. Those are notes from the playwright to the director about what's supposed to be on the stage, what has to be on the stage in order for the playwright's meaning to come across. Then anything that they've been specific about in terms of their setting is going to be very important. One play that we're going to read, for example, is called Naked Lunch. It's about a man named Vernon and a woman named Lucy, and they're getting together to have what seems like a date after they've broken up and they're trying to reconcile. And there's this description at the start of the play that on the stage there has to be a vase with some flowers in it, and the description says it can be a large vase with too few flowers or a small vase with too many, right? And it doesn't really matter, but what matters is that they're not matched, right? That there's something kind of off about the flowers. And that's a very quick signal to us as soon as the curtain opens that there's also something kind of off about their relationship. So in that sense, setting is very important because it establishes kind of mood, it establishes the place, it establishes lots of things about what's going to happen in that play from the moment the curtain opens or the lights come up. So the stage directions most of the time are going to be in italics, like they're slanted. Don't think that that makes them unimportant. Don't skip the stage directions as you're reading because they actually give extra layers of meaning. So make sure you read the stage directions as well. Okay, so we've just been talking about similarities between drama and short stories, but let's switch gears. Label this. Let's talk about some differences between drama and short stories. Okay, so we've already kind of referred to one big difference, which is kind of contained in setting, and that in a short story, the setting you get in paragraph form, you get in kind of prose. But in a play, the setting is actually on stage. The setting is actually physical. You can see the room where Ernest and Cecily are having tea. You can see the castle where the witch is doing her thing. Here, Wicked is very good. I haven't seen any of it. You can see Pride Rock, where Simba is being celebrated at his birth. So the setting there is very physical. One huge difference, or maybe what underlies all the differences between prose and drama, or between fiction and drama, is that in drama, everything is supposed to be acted out. If we're talking about fiction or prose, it's kind of a one-to-one exchange, right? If you're reading a novel or you're reading a short story, you're sitting there in your chair, and there's the book, and there's you, and those are the only entities involved in the interaction. If we're talking about drama, though, we've got all the actors on the stage, we've got all the people who are moving the sets, we've got the people who are running the lights, we've got the people who are doing the sound, we've got the people who are doing the smoke machines, we've got the people who hand out the programs, we've got the director who tells everybody where to stand, we've got the producer who gets money for all this to happen, we've got the costume designer, we've got all these other people in addition to the writer, in addition to the playwright, who kind of help determine the play's final meaning, right? And we even have to throw the audience into that group because the way an audience reacts can change the way characters behave on the stage, right? So if there's a line in a play that's supposed to be funny and nobody laughs, everybody kind of, like it gets a little bit harder to keep going, right? Or if something happens in a play that's not supposed to be funny but everybody laughs, you're like, oh shoot. Right? So even that interaction between the actors on the stage and the audience make drama much more a collaborative form of art. So that there are many opportunities for people to kind of put their imprint on it. And every time a script meets the eyes of another person, that other person has a chance to make changes or make adjustments in the meaning. So it's very different from fiction where, a writer finishes it and hits send, somebody else reads it, that's two people involved, as opposed to the dozens of people who might be involved in a play, or hundreds if it's a Broadway musical. So when you're reading drama, you really have to pay attention to the dialogue of the characters, because dialogue is basically all we get to understand what's going on. And I mean, this is true in live drama. It's also true in television and movies, right? That sometimes there'll be a voiceover where there's the voice of a character saying, this is what it means. This is what happened to me in the summer of 1973, and this is how it changed my life. I mean, sometimes you get a voiceover, but for the most part, we're used to experiencing stories where we have to get all of the background just from characters talking to each other, right? Bad TV shows, in my opinion, or bad movies have what's called an info dump, right? Where there's one character who's just talking, like, oh, we thought this nuclear reactor was underground, but it turns out there's a giant lizard in there. We don't know what it is. You think the new Godzilla movie? I'm iffy. Actually, no, I'm not iffy. It was terrible. My favorite thing about it was all the criticisms I could make. Very specific, well-argued criticisms about the new Godzilla movie. It wasn't good. No. But Her, that one, have you heard of that one with Joaquin Phoenix?
I really want to see it.
Where he starts dating his operating system, basically. It's wonderful. It is so good. So that one you can read as literature. You can watch that movie and it'll make you smarter. That's how good it is. Okay. What were we talking about? Differences between prose and drama. So I'm going to give you real quick a list of some things we talk about when we start writing drama in my creative writing class, which I teach in the fall. And you're not going to need to know all this for an essay, but it can be really useful to keep these things in mind when you're reading drama, because sometimes we can be kind of hard on scripts, or we can be kind of hard on drama because it doesn't function like a short story. But we kind of have to keep in mind that a playwright or a script is going for something a little bit different than a short story is. So let's label this one aspects of drama. And this is a list of 6 adjectives that answer the question, what kind of art is drama? And some of this will loop back over what we've already said in a general introduction, but some of it will be a little bit new. The first one is kind of fun because it's sort of a no-duh word. Drama is a dramatic art. And by dramatic, we just mean that something has to be happening, right? Like in a short story, you can take a break and you can talk about Miss Emily's house, and you can, contemplate, the taste of a cookie for 4 or 5 pages, which Proust does, actually. It's a life-changing moment when he tastes this particular cookie. But dramatic means that something has to be happening at every moment on the stage. If you have a character who wanders off too far into reflection, or if you get something that's not actually going on right in front, you're going to lose your audience. So drama is very fast-paced. So number 1, drama is dramatic art. Number 2, drama is a visual art. So in a sense, we're kind of doing a little bit of an injustice to these plays when we just read them on the page and we don't see them performed. Because even though we're getting the characters' words and we can talk about their conflict and we can talk about their motivations, we're not seeing everything that would be part of the set, right? We're not seeing the actual actors who would portray these characters. We're not seeing the pubs where they meet. We're not seeing the dining room. But when you see a live play, the way the stage is set, the way the characters are dressed, the way they move, all of that is part of the final meaning of the performance. So we have to keep in mind, or it can be very useful to pretend that we're seeing this play acted out in front of us to try to, kind of get the fullness of the meaning of it. So number 3, drama is an auditory art. And auditory is kind of connected to the idea that it's a live performance, that when you see a drama, when you see a play, you hear it as much as see it. Right? When you read a short story, you don't actually hear someone speaking to you. If you do, see medical professionals, see if you can get that worked out. But when you see a play, you can hear what the characters are saying. And actors can do a lot with the tone of voice, right? Like if somebody says hello when they answer the phone, they already sound like they're in kind of a bad mood, right? If they say hello, they sound very flirty, right? So the same word on the page can take on a totally different meaning in the way an actor speaks the line. So that's kind of referring to that extra layer of interpretation we get when there are actual people saying the lines. All right, number 4. Drama is a physically produced art. So it means that anything that's in a play has to actually be put on a stage. And this is relevant to my creative writing students because, one year when we were writing their one-act plays, one student whose play was otherwise very good, was very interesting, had at the very beginning of his play a description of how a two-prop plane flew across a blue Caribbean sky, passed through a cloud, and made a turn to come down the runway. It went down the runway, taxied, turned around, pulled into a hangar, and a guy got out. Okay, it's lovely for fiction, but what's the problem with trying to do that on the stage?
Can't really do it on the stage.
No, how are you going to land a plane on the stage? Like, is your stage as long as a runway? So physically, like, it was impossible to have that in the script, right? Because you can't land a plane on the stage. But we talked about it, and eventually he changed it, so there was just the noise of the propeller, there was the sound of the plane landing, and then the guy came out in his jumpsuit with his helmet, and it was like, he just landed the plane, right? So he got the same idea across, but he had changed it in such a way that it could be physically produced, that it could be actually on stage. So if you're reading some of these plays and you're like, well, why do they stay in the same room the whole time? Or why are they acting this way? Remember that playwrights are kind of limited by what characters can do live, by what they can do while they're actually standing in front of an audience. So it feels a little bit different than movies, television, fiction. All right, number 5. Drama is a continuous art. It's not like TV or a movie where you can just pause it if you have to go to the bathroom or if you get a phone call. Once the play starts, it keeps going until there's an intermission, right? And what that means for the playwright is kind of connected to the idea that it has to be a dramatic art, that there's always got to be something happening because you got to keep your audience with you. You got to keep them interested. But it also has to do with how they sort of divide up the moments in their play, right? How you'll get these little moments where something is accomplished, and then there's a lull, and then something is accomplished. And so the fact that everything has to be acted out in one sitting sometimes causes playwrights to make different decisions than the writer of a fiction piece would make. Because when you're reading a novel, you pick it up, you read a couple pages, you go do something else, you come back to it. The drama doesn't work that way. And finally, drama is a spectator art. So spectator art means that there's a live audience. Sometimes if you hear movie stars talk, and they talk about, they're doing a Broadway play, and they talk about how different it is to do a play than to do a movie. A play has a live audience, right? So even if they're playing the same role, there's a very different energy when they're performing for a live audience than there is when they're just kind of like a camera in their face and they're trying to have, profound emotion. So the fact that there's an audience involved means that it's kind of unpredictable what's going to happen in any given production of a play because the audience's reaction can sort of change the way the characters perform their lines. Has anybody done a play before?
I was like 5.
Yeah, okay. Kindergarten graduation. Yeah, something like that. It works though, because I mean, little kids in plays, if people laugh, they get like kind of confused. You know, it changes the performance a little bit. Not that you are a confused kid in your play. I'm sure you're still. Yeah, you were. Okay. Well, that's very cute though. That's why they put kids on stage. All right. So you have with you the vocabulary worksheet. So this worksheet is going to go over the main terms that you'll need to know as we're talking about drama. And you'll notice that a bunch of them we've already kind of defined a little bit. Do you see any on here that you might already know the meaning of just from our conversation?
Drama.
Drama, got it. Scene. Setting. Dialogue. Right, playwright even, we've talked about. Playwright is a person who makes plays. And I like that spelling, W-R-I-G-H-T. It's kind of weird, but it means like to make or to form. It's like barrel right or shipwright, like someone who builds a ship or who builds a barrel. I like that kind of meaning of it. You build a play, not just W-R-I-T-E, not just that you write it, you build it, you shape it, you craft it. Okay, so take this worksheet with you, and one of the things that you'll do in your Blackboard course is take a quiz on these words after you've defined them. So please make sure that you use the definitions in the back of your Bedford intro book, because some of these words have one meaning in the world at large, but they have a different meaning when we're talking about literature. So make sure you use the Bedford to get the right meaning for it. Okay, well, we're not quite done because there's one more thing I want to do for you guys today to talk about kind of synthesizing all this stuff that we've said about drama. And this is a little experiment that I run every time we start talking about drama to really kind of help you guys imagine what a difference actors can make and collaboration can make. So on this page of your packet, turn to page 1398, it's kind of near the back. So this is a little script from the show Seinfeld. Do you watch Seinfeld? Okay. So this is kind of, Seinfeld is sort of funny as a show because it's kind of based on the life of comedian Jerry Seinfeld and his friendships with these other people. And the joke about the show is that it's a show about nothing, right? That everybody else was doing situations like, Three's Company, like two girls and a guy share an apartment, and ooh, what happens when they're trying to live together, or like Full House, like a single dad with all these kids and his crazy uncles up there, and ooh, what happens? What are the situations that are comedic in the lives of these families? But one thing that makes Seinfeld a little bit different from that is that he was very conscious of making a show about nothing. Like, there's no situation. It's just some people who are living. And so this episode is kind of famous in terms of Seinfeld history because it dramatizes Jerry, who's the comedian guy, and his friend George, who are talking about pitching a show to NBC, and they're trying to decide what the show is going to be about. Okay, we're going to do this in a couple of stages. For the first stage, I want you to read through the end of the scene, Act 1, Scene C. Read silently to yourself through the end of the scene. Give you a couple minutes to do that. I'm sorry. I'm not hearing a whole lot of giggles, so my guess is you guys really haven't seen Seinfeld.
I've seen the episode, but I'm not really a big fan.
Okay, that's fair enough. So we've got two characters here, right? Jerry is the comedian guy, and George is his friend. Tell me a little bit about Jerry. What kind of person is he? Can you tell?
Sarcastic.
Okay. Why do you say sarcastic?
Because he's facetious about everything he says too.
Okay. All right. He's making a joke every time he's talking. How about George? What can you pick up about George's personality just in this scene? Okay. What's he optimistic about? You're right. I like how you phrase that. What's he optimistic about? Yeah, he's like, we can do this, right? We can make it happen. And he's optimistic in sort of a pushy way, right? And what we don't know, since we haven't read the beginning part of the script, is that this is Jerry's opportunity. And George is like, I'm coming too. Like, I'll go with you. Like, we'll make this happen. And so he's kind of like, I'm going to be part of your show. And Jerry's like, oh, I'm not too sure, right? So George is kind of optimistic. He's kind of pushy. Jerry's a little bit sarcastic. And Jerry's the one who actually has the opportunity here. Okay, so that was round one, silent reading. In round two, I'm going to ask some of you guys to play George and Jerry. So we need two Georges and two Jerrys. We're going to switch in the middle. Guys or girls? Anybody want to be Jerry 1? All right, Jerry 1. Jerry 2? Or I'm auctioning.
I'll be Jerry too.
All right, Jerry 2. Jerry 1, Jerry 2. We need a George 1. Guy or girl? Ladies, you're a minority here, but you can read George. Okay. Oh, no. All right, will you be, sorry, I'm learning names. Ian? No. Court. Okay. Will you be, George? Will you be George 1? Will you be George 2?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so we need Jerry 1 and George 1. And we're going to read about halfway through, and then we'll switch. Okay, you're going to have to save your snack for a little bit later. Court/George.
All right, where we at?
Okay, we're on page 1398, scene C. We get this direction at the top, interior coffee shop, lunchtime, day, right? So that's where we are. What would you expect to be on the stage if we're in a coffee shop at lunchtime? Okay. Maybe a couch. Okay, tables, right? Napkins, right? It's going to be a restaurant setting, right? And if it's at lunchtime in the middle of the day, there are probably going to be some people in the background. Okay, so if we're imagining what the stage is going to look like, we got to imagine kind of a cafe and some other people who don't have speaking lines messing around in the background. Okay, Jerry and George enter, and then George, you have the first line.
So what's happening with the TV show? You come up with anything?
Nope. No.
Why didn't they have salsa on it? Why don't they have salsa on the table?
What do you need salsa for?
Salsa is the #1 condiment in America.
You know why? You know why? Because everyone likes, because people like to say salsa. Excuse me, do you have salsa? We need more salsa. Where's the salsa? No salsa?
You know, it must be impossible for a Spanish person to order seltzer and not get salsa. Angry. I want seltzer, not salsa.
All right. So that, in the parentheses, that's an example of the stage direction. You wouldn't say that out loud, but your next line would be angry. I want a salsa, not salsa.
Don't you know the difference between salsa and salsa? You have salsa, and then you have salsa after the salsa.
See, this should be a show. This is the show.
What?
This just talking.
Yeah, right.
I'm really serious. I think it's a good idea. I think that's a good idea.
Just talking? What's the show about?
It's about nothing.
No story?
Nope, forget the story.
You got to have a story.
Who says you gotta have a story? Remember when we were waiting for the table at that Chinese restaurant that time? That could be a TV show.
Who's on the show? Who are the characters?
I could be a character.
You?
You could be. You could base a character on me.
So on the show, there's a character named George Costanza.
Yeah, there's something wrong with that. I'm a character. People are always saying to me, you know, you're quite a character.
Okay, let's pause here since we're about halfway. Okay, so I'm hearing a little more giggle here, right? So what are some differences that you notice when we've got people actually reading these lines and when you just read it to yourself? You get more of the tone, right? You get a lot more of the back and forth, right? That they're kind of playing tennis almost, tossing it back and forth. We got some of the sarcasm. We can kind of get the seltzer salsa joke when you say it out loud. If you just read it on your page, it's like, you know, but if you say seltzer salsa, oh, okay. You know, so when we hear it, it's a little bit funnier. Okay, so let's switch to Jerry 2 and George 2. Okay, so the next line belongs to
Jerry.
Okay, go for it.
Whoever is it? And who's
well, you knew. I thought you knew where you were. Let's pick up with who else is on the show.
Okay, and who's on the show? Who are the characters?
Lane could be a character. Kramer.
Wait,
is that who else is on the show, right? Where were we? Is that
okay, that's my bad.
Yeah, let's start with who else is on the show.
That's what I thought you said.
Okay.
That's what we were
Okay, do it. Let's see.
Alright.
And who else is on the show?
All right.
Lane could be a character. Kramer.
Now, he's a character. So, everyone I know is a character on the show.
Right.
It's about nothing?
Absolutely nothing.
So, you're saying, I go into NBC and I tell them I got this idea for a show about nothing.
We go to NBC.
We? This one, you're a writer.
Writer, we're talking about a sitcom.
You want to go with me to NBC?
Yeah, I think we really got something here.
What do we got?
An idea.
What idea?
An idea for the show.
I still don't know what the idea is.
It's about nothing.
Right.
Everybody's doing something. We'll do nothing.
So we go to NBC, we tell them we got an idea for a show about nothing.
Exactly.
They say, what's the show about? I say nothing.
There you go.
I don't know what it means by that.
Just like a pause.
I think you may have something there.
All right, good. Okay, so you hear how the tone is a little bit different when we switch to George 2 and Jerry 2. Right, the pace got a little bit quicker. You guys were both talking a little bit faster than our first actors. And so it feels a little bit different when different actors say even the same lines, right? So by now you've probably already experienced 3 different versions of this same scene. The one that was in your head when you read silently, the one from George and Jerry 1, and then the one from George and Jerry 2. So let's add yet another layer, and I'm going to show you a clip of the actual scene. So we'll see it with the actual actors who play these parts. And hopefully all my equipment will cooperate. That's alright, these guys are professionals. Alright, here we go. So the same scene, same lines. But we can already see a little bit what the coffee shop looks like. Maybe full screen.
So we have for the TV show from outside? No. Why do they have salsa on the table? What do you need salsa for? Salsa is now the number one condiment in America. Do you know why? Because people like to say salsa. Excuse me, do you have any salsa? We need more salsa. Where's the salsa? No salsa. It must be impossible for a Spanish person to order salsa and not get salsa. I wanted salsa. That's salsa. Salsa and salsa. You have the salsa after the salsa. What? Yeah, right. I'm really serious. I think that's a good idea. Just talking, what's the show about? It's about nothing. The story? Oh, forget a story. You gotta have a story. You said you gotta have a story. Remember when we were waiting for that table in that Chinese restaurant that time? That would be a TV show. And who's on the show? Who are the characters? I could be a character. You? Yeah, you base a character on me. So on the show, there's a character named George Costanza? Yeah. There's something wrong with that? I'm a character. People are saying to me, you know, it's like a character. And who else is on the show? Elaine could be a character. Kramer. Now he's a character. So everybody I know is a character on the show. Right? And it's about nothing. Absolutely nothing. So you're saying I go into NBC and tell them I got this idea for a show about nothing. We go to NBC. one of you are right. Right, we're talking about a sitcom. You want to go with me to NBC? Yeah, I think we really got something here. What do we got? An idea. One idea. An idea for the show. I still don't know what the idea is. It's about nothing. Right. Everybody's doing something. We're doing nothing. So we go into NBC and tell them, like, yeah, we're show about nothing. Exactly. They say, what's your show about? I say, nothing. There you go. I think you can have something here.
So, what are some differences then between what we see on the screen and what we experienced even when you guys were reading it? What are some things that are added?
Laughs in the background.
Pauses, right? We got the laugh track, right? And it's just kind of an aspect of human beings that when we hear somebody else laugh, we kind of are more likely to laugh. It's kind of like when you see somebody yawn, you want to yawn too, right? So the laugh track kind of helps us find this stuff funny. How about the cafe? Like, how did they set it up? Was it like you imagined the cafe would be set up? Maybe a little bit different.
Smaller than I imagined.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm impressed by all the people in the background who are just like, they're going about their daily business and not making a sound, right? So they're pretty good background actors. And we get kind of a lot of the personality of those two characters, right? We can see the way they play it that George and Jerry are kind of having fun together, right? That they're not just throwing it back and forth, that they're like helping each other make jokes and kind of playing off of each other. And then we kind of understand a little bit better why George thinks that's a good idea for the show, right? Because he and Jerry are having a good time and he thinks, what if this is what the show is about? That it's just people having fun together. So what I want you to take away from this experience is to keep in mind that the script that you get or that you read when you're going to read these plays is not meant to be the final word on what happens, right? They're meant to be produced, they're meant to be acted, they're meant to be staged. And so there would be all these other layers of meaning that would happen when actors were cast and people actually participated and the audience came in and listened to these lines spoken. So keep that in mind as you're reading these plays, that there's a whole other level of meaning that would be there if they were actually staged. Okay, keep your seat for just a second.